us manually placing data into our table. But now, say we want user input and we want them to be able to add friends here. So let's add this. You can put it on a separate HTML, but just for simplicity, we're going to put it at the bottom of our existing form. So let's go to our code and let's add this form to the bottom. And let's just run it to make sure that the form shows up. So if I refresh the page, I should see the form at the bottom. Great. So now, next we want to do is we want to be able to insert the values into our database. So this is what our hard-coded SQL will probably look like. And let's use this syntax to be able to add that into our database. So from here, we know we're going to have this create friend method. So over here, we're going to want to have a route called create friend. And we know that this one is going to accept specifically post requests. And we will go ahead and call it something like add friend to database. And so this next part, we're going to want to write out the query as a string. Because remember that to Python, this is simply a string. But we will, once it goes through PyMySQL, it turns it into something that SQL can then understand. So we'll insert into, and we'll need the name of the database, or the table that we're entering into, and the column names that we are adding. So for me, I would check here, and I have first name, last name, and occupation. The other ones are maybe getting updated right away, or by default. Maybe if we're doing created at and updated at. And then we are going to give it values. Where we could hard code it, check out the next chapter to understand why we don't want to hard code here. We're going to use this special syntax. We'll come back to what we're going to put in those in a second. But we're basically telling it that these values are going to come from somewhere else. So that's first name, last name, and occupation. And then these last pieces are SQL commands, so we can use those there. And then we're going to add this data dictionary of sorts. And what we're going to do here is put the key names of the things that we actually want to add. So if I give a key name here, for example, as first name, that is going to come from the form. And remember that the key that we use when we use request.form comes from the name of the input from over here. So this is going to be fname, where this over here is whatever I decide to call it. It's just that whatever I decide here is the name that will go here. So that's the name that goes here. And then same thing for the last name. Remember, this comes from the form, which is lname. And then if we do OC, this comes from over here, which is OCC. So we'll go ahead and use those up here, ln and OC. And that's how it knows that those keys come from this data dictionary. And so then when we actually run the query, we're going to first want to make a connection to our DB. It doesn't have to be called MySQL, it's just a variable name, right? We could call it connect to MySQL, but that we're going to want to connect to the same database and then run the query. So MySQL.queryDB and send in both the query string and the data dictionary. So once we run that, then we can, remember, after a post request, we want to redirect. Because if we don't, in this case, we actually are adding things to our database. If we rendered the page on this request and we hit refresh, it would actually add that user to our database over and over again. So let's test this out. And let's add Leslie, nope. And her job is councilwoman. Whoop, I forgot to import request up here. Remember, whenever you see this name, something is not defined, and you're using something like request over here, don't forget to import it. And probably while we're on that, I also forgot to import redirect, so let's add that. So let's try to add her again. here my SQL because I called it DB, so I should use DB here. And one more time. Woohoo! And there we go. Leslie Knope.